Hi, it's great to be with you all today, and I'm really excited to talk about data and analytics, a source for truth and a force for good, something that is very near and dear to my heart. It's a consistent theme in my own career, and I think very topical in today's world. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about my own leadership journey, some of the companies I've been fortunate to work for, and really about the changing role of data and analytics. I'm going to use Nielsen, my current employer, as a case study, and then I'm going to give you one very specific example of how data and insights are helping shape change in the media industry. I have been fortunate in my own career and leadership journey to work for some great companies. And these are all legacy brands with a strong heritage of being customer focused and driving growth through focusing on customers. Throughout my career journeys, I've worked on many different roles in the US, in international, in the service industry, in the manufacturing industry, crisis management and growth oriented. But through it all, I continue to focus on growing client relationships by focusing on data and insights. And you'll see that that is a key theme in my own career. It's what led me to Wharton for my own MBA. And subsequent to that, it's what's led me to Nielsen. But really importantly, as I look back on my career, there are these common threads, and that common thread is really around the use of data. As I said, it is so critical to success, whether you're a general manager or a marketer, focusing on the so what, asking for the right questions, listening to the data, and always, always representing the truth is what makes companies strong. When companies go wrong, it's often around those last points, around not listening to the data and not staying focused on the truth and not taking the right action. So I've been very fortunate in my own career to hold these values true, near and dear, because good marketers not only use data, but actually take action based on that data. So I'm very excited today to share my experience with you at Nielsen. Nielsen, as in with many in the data world today, is looked at as both a source of truth but also under fire when that truth does not align with any one desired view, something we see playing out in the media all the time. At Nielsen, we provide a service to the media industry, but ultimately to consumers. We provide unparalleled data that's both passive and active, and we have a high responsibility because while we don't actually create content, we have a huge role to play in what content is actually created. And therefore, the truth is so important because what we ultimately do is influence what you ultimately see and hear. And that's why it's so critical. So let me share a little bit with you about Nielsen, about who we are and what we do. So who are we? Well, Nielsen is, as I said, a data and analytics driven company. We are all about powering a better media future for all people. We have our core values of inclusion, courage, and growth. And we're going to talk a little bit about that one of inclusion, but also courage, because they're both critical, in my belief, to growing. We provide measurement, planning, and outcome content solutions to the media industry. And really importantly, if you know us probably as a TV measurement company, but we do much more than that because as I'll talk about, we cover so many different forms of media. We operate in 60 countries, employ 2,000 technology and data scientists, and we serve agencies, advertisers, broadcasters, content creators, distributors, and innovators. And so we'll talk a lot more about the work we do and what impact it has, but it's just really important to know that we are in a very unique position because we measure and see everything in the media world of consumption and the consumer, and it gives us a unique perch from which we're able to help inform and advise and partner with the rest of our media ecosystem. So let's zoom back out. Let's talk a little bit about the world today. The events of 2020 and 2021, up to and including the resolution of the George Floyd murder, has continued to bring into public discourse the inequities and injustices that exist in our society. I believe we have a moral obligation as business leaders and data and analytics professionals to use our expertise as agency for positive change. It's a very cool time to be in data and analytics, but the responsibility to use our skills as a force for good is a real one. And this plays out on global stages in US politics and in the arts and entertainment world. If we zoom back into media and entertainment, just think about maybe the award shows you've watched recently, the Grammys or the Oscars, where the focus was not just on who won, but really importantly on where those industries were going as a reflection of society. It was all about diversity and inclusion and whether or not the industry and the culture at large are representative as they should be. And so the challenge was not only how does the media industry and the culture demonstrate that it's inclusive, but how is that progress going to be quantified? And I'd posit that data and analytics is going to play a critical role going forward. Audiences expect inclusion and are seeking out content and stories and music where they feel seen. Stories that reflect the diverse experiences that they have are in more demand than ever. So Nielsen has a role to play with our unique perch in the media world, an objective view across. We have a responsibility to show the industry how others view and perceive and engage in their content. At Nielsen, we ask ourselves, how can the use of data and analytics affect systemic change? Of course, we're asked primarily to understand what consumers are listening to and watching. That is job number one. It'd be very easy, though, just to provide the data. And we do provide the data, more data than people always necessarily want and need. But we also go a level deeper. What consumers and what media are people consuming? Where, why, and how is that changing? This is about ultimate accountability to help reflect and inform. We've seen all kinds of statements and commitments in the years past by companies and corporations, but now action is being demanded. We've heard what gets measured gets managed, and that's increasingly true in media. Media has always been a balance of art and science, and I would argue that in the past, maybe a little bit more toward the art, that we created things that felt right or seemed right or people seemed to like. But it's becoming increasingly science-driven. People want to know what people like, know what people are watching, know how they feel with certainty, with truth. And that is where the data and insights comes in. Nielsen has a profound influence on our culture. We are in a unique position to measure and reflect it, which in turn leads us to influence. It is not just about the data. We play a critical role in the overall ecosystem. First, it's important to note, we are all about big data. In fact, I like to say, I think we probably were one of the first true big data companies. Metadata is about numbers. The sources of data at Nielsen are exhaustive and comprehensive. We report media use over 7 terabytes of data daily from every device across television, digital, audio, and other aspects of the media space. That is a lot of consumption. Adult consumers spend a total of over 1 trillion minutes a week on media across TV, including streaming, radio, and digital. And this, by the way, has been steadily increasing, as probably all of us know during the pandemic. I know in our household, steadily increasing. And we know that what has been watched and listened to, and we measure that for the industry. So metadata is really important. But so are people. And panels are all about people. We calibrate big data with panels that Nielsen uniquely offers. And that brings another level of truth to who we are as humans and what we care about. In addition to this metadata, our panels measure real people in real homes. Why? Because our single source panels reflect true people level measurement, and we are the only company that deploys them. The set-top box data alone cannot deliver currency-grade quality, and big data has to be grounded in a panel truth to ensure reliability. When you put the panels and the big data together, what you really get is not just data, but also the ability to reflect back the true representation of our society. These panels, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in detail, enable us to link that metadata with actual, real individuals and families to understand the granularity of who is consuming what every minute of the day. Nielsen employs trusted and fair data science principles and spends millions of dollars to ensure that every person is represented in our measurement. We are the currency of the media industry and a neutral, objective source of truth, and that requires us to be sure everyone is counted. How do we do this? Well, Nielsen's panels are high-quality samples that are geographically and demographically representative of this TV household universe. This results in data that is projectable to the universe of US TV households and people in TV households. The panels have already led us to have representation and inclusion. Nielsen's TV panel methodology ensures that every household has an equal opportunity for selection within the panel, every household in America. Recruitment methodology utilizes in-person recruitment and the gold standard in survey research for recruitment so that we can reach hard-to-reach demographics, including those in poor urban and rural areas, different race and ethnic backgrounds, and gender identity across the U.S. So critically important, we are so methodical about ensuring that we get the right households in our panels so that those panels are truly representative of the U.S. population. So it's really important because as we talk about metadata in our panels, we've talked a little bit about why we care about the panels having full representation, because it actually allows us to ensure that our data is credible. But also importantly, it has led us to become strong advocates of the census. And you might think, well, why? But everything we do is fundamentally built on the foundation of the census. It's the foundation for all of our audience measurement. So we recruit our panels proportionately to the census. We don't measure citizenship, we measure audiences. And to maintain the integrity of the data on the population of our country, it's essential that we count everyone. That makes all the difference. With the pandemic and the politics of the citizenship question on the census survey, the undercounting of minorities was a real possibility. Minority groups could be undercounted, hard to locate, hard to contact, hard to persuade, and therefore not complete the sentence. Undercounting would introduce bias and reduce the quality of our data infrastructure, which then fuels the media industry's knowledge of who is watching and what they're watching. And in this case, it required us to take a strong position. We established a Project True Count in 2019 to support a fair and accurate 2020 census. We've been very public about the criticality of every voice being heard. We enlisted 110,000 employees, many clients, and 200 nonprofit partners to help participate in the census. Nielsen also filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court to oppose the citizenship question. So sometimes staying true to the truth and making sure your data is as accurate as possible requires you to take a stand and to do things that you otherwise might think are beyond the purview of your particular mandate. So now that I've talked about the importance of panels and the power of combining data and insights, I want to look at a specific example. This is a very exciting one, which I'm pleased to say we are just now launching. We have a product and offering called Gracenote Inclusion Analytics that allows us to peel back the onion of inclusion from a media standpoint. And remember, we talked about how important that is to take what we're seeing, which is an increasingly diverse population, and understand what role it plays in media consumption and in content development. So in this case, we merge data sets. We have an industry-leading Gracenote global video program metadata, and that's a lot of words. But basically what that means is we have the data that underpins all the programming guides around the consumption of video, music, sports, and we also have Studio Systems celebrity race and ethnicity data. So when you go and search on Netflix or Hulu or Pandora for a song or for a movie, we collect all of that data about the artist, about the timing, about the genre, about the ethnicity and race of the actors and of the producers. And then we married that with our own Nielsen TV ratings and streaming video on demand content ratings data. The combination of this data delivers new proprietary metrics that help us assess the degree to which different identity groups are featured in programming and whether or not that's reflective of the audience at large. These insights provide a comprehensive view of who is on screen and in the audience and how that compares to society at large. I've talked a little bit about the importance of ensuring inclusivity in the panel by using census data and ensuring that all people are counted. Let's dig deeper on this inclusion analytics. Having the right data, asking the right questions, and being willing to share the truth is an imperative. And this is a great example of how we brought that truth to bear for the benefit of the content producers in the industry. And we'll get to look a little bit at how that data actually informs the content that's created and the broadcasting and production of that content. Let's look specifically at how having the right data can lend insight into truth-telling that ultimately can affect systemic change. Here's a great example. Women make up 52% of the US population, yet only have a 38% share of the screen. Women and people of color are underrepresented on the screen. Now, it's important in this data to acknowledge that LGBTQ representation looks strong according to the reported estimates, but it's a small population and can be harder to measure because older generations are less likely to identify themselves as LGBTQ. But really importantly, what we start to see here in the data is that women and people of color are underrepresented. So how do we start to address these inequity? Well, let's look further. When we look at genre, we see that all genres have a lower representation for women and people of color. But news has the lowest amount of representation among women and people of color. Now, what's interesting about that is, and there was a lot of coverage about this in the last couple of months, is over the last few months, most of the networks have started using more women covering the White House. And it's been a very conscious effort to have more women in the news media on the screen. The same is true of people of color. And so importantly, these studies are starting to not only demonstrate the inequities, but informing and changing them. By providing this reflection back to the media industry is able to take action. Whereas before it might have been subjective, it now becomes fact-based and objective. And the data and insights actually lead to real changes that create greater equity in the system. So I've shown you some examples of how screen representation is lower for minority groups compared to the overall population. I'd also like to look at how that data can point out inequities in a way that also shapes the content. So we talked about representation in terms of newscasters, and are there more women and more people of color, but it's also really important to understand what is the content itself. How does that shatter stereotypes if it's shaped differently? When white women view themselves on the screen, they are represented in themes like family homes and friendships versus themes like dysfunction and rivalry for women of color. So if you look at this page, critically important is not just if diversity is present, but how is it present? This slide shows the themes and narratives that are perceived by those in these groups. Think about how this shapes the way we think about ourselves, other races, ethnic, and identity groups. Now, you might be wondering about how we got here. Well, we evaluated top keyword descriptors associated with programming where both representation and audience viewing were high, particularly for women of color. When women of color see themselves represented, they are viewing themselves in programs with descriptors like dysfunction, rivalry, melodrama, and police stations, versus white women who see themselves in programs with themes like family homes, love, friendship, and husbands. In an example using a popular drama series, which I'm not going to say, but a popular drama comedy series, Black women in that series have a 40% share of screen for this program. Black women are only 7% of the population. So the Inclusion Opportunity Index, which we now measure, is 546. And all that means is that Black women are very well represented for this program. Now, interestingly, the video descriptors for this program include themes like romantic comedy, hilarious, thought-provoking, different from most of the prominent themes we see in content where Black women see themselves most. So this is obviously where you would most want to see things changing, where people are seeing themselves in ways that are positive and engaging, which in turn leads to more people actually seeing the content. And that's the good cycle of when people take the insights that the data has made available and actually use it to inform the creation of content. So based on the previous example, you can see that it's not just looking for a box to be checked, but that these shows do what these shows do in fact do in terms of breaking stereotype. What goes on off screen is determining what goes on screen. And together we're positioned to help the industry create lasting change. As a measurement company, we understand that measuring disparities also makes them actionable. We think this is a really good example of doing the right thing throughout the entire value chain. The right data, the analytics, having a point of view, and holding up the mirror for the industry to see itself, as the consumer experiences it. At Nielsen, we believe that audience is everything. It is critical we play our role to measure and reflect what is happening with consumers and their engagement of media, to appreciate the cultural shifts that affect consumers, advertisers, broadcasters, agencies, studios, and the world at large, and to do our part. Nielsen sits at the interesting intersection of culture, media, and consumers, and is the voice of truth for the media industry. In a society that is increasingly fragmented and perhaps skeptical, truth is a valuable commodity and the great equalizer. As we sit here today, we take on the responsibility of being that source of truth, but hopefully also a force for good. And when we do that, as a data and analytics professional, as a marketing professional, as an executive, and as an industry, it's when we're at our best. Thank you.
Wow, this was amazing, Jamie. Thank you so much. Very impactful, wonderful examples. I have a few questions coming in. I have a few questions on myself as well. So let's kick it off.
Awesome.
Great. So obviously a company like Nielsen, really a very large company, having you at the helm. For companies that are much smaller who want to implement the inclusion practice that you mentioned around analytics, what would be a way of getting them started?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it has to start in two ways. One is, first of all, just culturally, that if it's important to your company as a culture, that you want to have a culture of inclusivity, you're going to start asking the right questions. And then really importantly is being very clear about the objective. So what are you solving for, right? Like we knew that we were solving for understanding whether the content, right, and the media that's consumed is representative and inclusive. And I think for every company that's going to be different. I know when I was at Wells Fargo, that was people's access to the financial industry. But when you start with a very clear objective of what you really want to impact or what you want to understand, then it's easier to focus on the data and make sure that you're actually looking at the right things. The other thing I would say is always keep in mind the bottom line impact. It's really important to bring along the rest of your organization, your leadership, to be focused on things that you know ultimately are going to have a bottom line impact. It's absolutely the right thing to do, but it's important that it also be something that is obviously impacting the financial performance and success of the company.
Great point. I have some other questions coming up as well. One of them was more along the lines of data and all the skills that you mentioned. One question from the audience is, what skills are you looking for as you perhaps hire yourself and other companies you've hired for, recent graduates and new professionals that they should have to become effective leaders like yourselves?
Thank you. No, it's great. And I have to tell you, I love personally, I love bringing people out of Wharton, out of school directly, but also have had a little experience. But to me, the single biggest thing is a passion for learning and a growth mindset. So when we say growth mindset, it's really that willingness and eagerness to learn, to explore, because especially in the area of data and analytics, things are changing so fast, skill sets are changing, that knowing how to adapt and learn and being curious is actually, I believe, one of the greatest predictors of success. The desire and the passion to want to learn more, and then especially the curiosity that comes in specifically around the insights area. So we are actually going to post also a link, I think, somehow in the chat or later on, that if anyone's interested in exploring careers at Nielsen, that we do have a link that you can go to. Because as I said, we're always excited to bring on, we are a data science and technology company who happens to be in the media world, but we very much are always looking for great talent.
Wonderful. And I know, working with Nielsen, having you at the helm would be a huge plus for anybody who wants to join.
Thank you.
Some other questions as well. One of them is kind of an interesting one. I think it would be great to hear from your perspective how you're collecting data around race at Nielsen. One question from the audience is, how can we ask about race and other cultural backgrounds as an online survey without kind of offending somebody or kind of them dropping off the survey?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have to tell you, I've always been a big believer that when people feel that there is value in the information they provide, they're more than willing to provide that data. But they have to trust you, and they have to trust why and how you're using that data. So to me, you have to be very transparent about how that data is going to be used, and then you have to live up to it. So if you say you're collecting data in order to deliver a better experience, and here's how that's going to be used, you have to live up to that. And I think that's why people talk about many of the online companies today obviously ask a lot of data and are able to capture and utilize that data, but it's because they're trusted. People say, I always laugh because we always think, some companies, Apple knows so much about us, but they also uphold their end of the bargain. They give us an experience that's worth that. So, there's obviously a lot we glean through third-party data, but I think that first-party relationship, when you have it, is sacrosanct, and you have to just care for it that way.
Wonderful point. And I think the examples that you gave, Jamie, around, how you're measuring, for example, kind of putting together the content part of it, who's watching it, I think that was pretty amazing. Related to that, I think there's a question which is being asked is, how do you measure the impact of these equitable changes in representation to content? And kind of how do you, and I'll just add on to that question, do you work closely, or Nielsen rather works closely with the media houses to kind of inform them what's happening? Do you have collaborative work with them? How does that work?
Yeah, we very much partner and for two reasons. One is we want to know what questions are. The one part of this is how can we help? Our job is really to help the ecosystem. And we, as I said on the speech, we don't create content, but we provide so much of the insight that goes into that creation that hopefully we're playing a really important role as sort of an enabler, if you will, of providing that. And I think that's where the panels also, I can't overstate enough the importance of those, because big data is not measurement, because it's for the media side of it, it's at a device level. And it's about people who consume media. It's about who are they, what are they watching, why are they watching it? And if you just count widgets, it's not enough. And so that's where I think the real side, the insight has been really helpful. I know when I was an advertiser at Wells Fargo, we purchase media that we think appeals to our customers or the target audience we're trying to reach. And that's not just about an individual, it's an individual with certain demographic and geographic characteristics.
Wonderful. Just to your point, Jamie, we have posted the opening on chat, so I think people should be, all the attendees should be able to look at it. Wonderful. Just kind of continuing along this theme, I think it was quite interesting to kind of especially look at the kinds of analytics, of course, around inclusion. But as I can imagine, this last year, for a variety of reasons, the pandemic, the 2020 election, and all the different things that we've had, the social unrest, what have been your key takeaways? And kind of, how have you been, obviously you just joined Nielsen a few months ago. What have you been kind of, what is your direction as to how Nielsen can contribute to all the discussion that's happening?
Yeah, I think the single biggest thing that COVID has taught us, first of all, two things probably. One is that you can't predict, right, fully what's going to happen in a situation like a pandemic, but that you have to rely on data to make good decisions, right? You have to have as much information as you can to inform it, because there's always going to be a bit of gut or a bit of intuition, because you can't have perfect data into what's going to happen tomorrow. The other thing I would say is what was so critical to us is giving people the data locally. Remember that, so what we started to see early in the pandemic was that local news was increasing, streaming was increasing, linear was increasing, podcasts increased. I think that we added 8 million new consumers to podcasts. Now, since then, some of those trends are changing. So year over year now, streaming is coming down a little bit just because people are normalizing again. Linear did come down, but part of that is also because think of it, there was no new content being, a lot less content created. And sports, major driver, right, of linear TV consumption. Sports were significantly down. Now they're coming back up again. So part of this is seeing what the changes had, the impact they had, looking at the data, then using it to the best possible to predict what's going to happen next. And our job is to help the industry do that. And so being real time, being granular, right, but also helping people interpret that data going forward is a role that we've been playing.
Yeah, and I can imagine, I think one of the things I'm sure you're grappling with, and we had a wonderful discussion in our Markets in Motion series, is, what do you think the media trends would be in the future?
It's a great question. I do think, and all of these things are sort of cyclical, right? I think at some point there is a maximum. And so the channels are shifting clearly. But how many more hours a day will people spend on devices? That's a really good question. I do think there's sort of a thought that at some point maybe that plateaus or takes on a different level of cyclicality. I think we know now that people are going back out again and engaging in social, interactions and eating out, that is going to change the consumption habits that were formed over the last year. But I think even over the next number of years, the bigger question is, how much proliferation and splintering is there going to be versus consolidation?
Yeah.
streamlining. To your point, is there an infinite number of devices and an infinite number of content that people consume, or do those start to coalesce into fewer? And I think that's going to be the big question.
Great point. No, I think that's something, it's going to be an exciting area to be in, and kind of seeing how things, the media war, so to speak. And a very interesting question that has come up from Angie in chat is, again, around inclusion and representation. I'll just read out the question. The push for inclusion has been there for decades. In your opinion, and based on obviously the work you've been doing at Nielsen and other companies, what has fundamentally changed in the last year? Is it mostly just acceleration? Is it catching up to something that was already bubbling up?
I think a lot of it, yeah. I mean, I think, look, certainly the question is, when do you hit sort of a inflection point? And I think in society, we've hit an inflection point. But I also think about just how, in our own little view today, how the data and analytics and the ability to do the kind of measurement that we're now doing is helping to accelerate the transformation, right? That it used to be, we had a lot of conjecture and a lot of belief, but we didn't have the data. Now we have the data that actually ties back to what are we in fact putting out in our media? And is that really what people want and need to see? And I think when you bring that reality to bear, and I'm a big believer that, more data you have, it's helpful. In this case, I think it's accelerating what has been an increasing need to transform. But now we have the tools to be able to look at it and feel more confident about the way we bring that to life. There's no question, though, underpinning all of that, I think, is this, that we're at a societal inflection.
No, great point. And also, I think I really like the point that you had in your presentation around how, especially during this time, to kind of make sure that the data that you have about representation is quite clear in terms of citizenship and so on and so forth. So again, I mean, that was a very interesting case of Nielsen taking a stand and kind of making sure that the data is as verified as possible. A quick question, last one, I think we are almost out of time, is, how has the Nielsen panel helped inform and influence who we represent on the screen? Do you see many such changes coming from the media side of the story?
Yeah, I think between, and it's both the panel that informs that, as well as we said, bringing together these data sets about the content and about the actual viewers, right? And bringing them into the same data lake, if you will, to explore that. But I do, because I think that, again, we've been previewing with studios and artists some of this work, and then it will be more broadly available to advertisers, other brands, kind of midsummer. But as we've been previewing it, what people have said is, this gives me so much more knowledge about how to be better, like how to actually change the composition of what I'm doing in my art. And it's really exciting, because I think people have always felt that way and had that intuition. But again, this gives people the data to say, okay, I understand I'm way underrepresenting, right? The people that my viewers want to see, right? I need to think about that differently. You take shows like Bridgerton, right? And that really broke a lot of norms. A lot of that, I think, is in response to what people want to see, right? The data that says they want to see something different.
No, great point. I still have to catch up on that. My Netflix is filled up with Bollywood movies. So I still have to go towards Bridgerton, but I will do so soon. All right, I think we are just out of time. Thank you so much, Jamie, for this amazing insights, and of course, on a personal note, for your continued support of Wharton Customer Analytics in general. Thank you so very much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been great, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the day.
Thank you.